This is 6 News, our top stories this hour. 2 babies die and dozens at risk in Gaza hospitals, surrounded by Israeli tanks and left without power, while Netanyahu again rejects calls for a ceasefire. CCTV footage emerges at the moment. A huge fire rips through a burger shop in Melbourne, while an apology is issued to the Jewish community following violent clashes after the blaze. Also this hour, the Optus boss set to be grilled over Wednesday's network outage as the company faces the threat of substantial fines over the customer's inability to call 000. And later, concerns over possible low turnout as voters in the Victorian seat of Mulgrave prepare to decide who will replace former Premier Dan Andrews. Good evening. 2 premature babies have died and another 37 at risk after the neonatal intensive care unit at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital stopped working due to a lack of electricity. Israeli tanks have surrounded the complex, which has had to suspend all operations. The facility's director says there is a lack of fuel which provides electricity to the incubators, allowing for warm temperatures and a constant flow of oxygen. Initial reports stated that 39 infants who were in ICU had died, have since been removed, with the Palestinian health minister apparently misspeaking. The babies are currently alive. Multiple reports indicate 4 other people in ICU have died, with the health ministry saying 1 patient was killed as a result of an Israeli strike. In a statement from Doctors Without Borders, the group said their staff are still working and have been hit several times, including in the maternity and outpatient departments, resulting in multiple deaths and injuries. The hostilities around the hospital have not stopped. MSF teams and hundreds of patients are still inside Al-Shifa Hospital. MSF urgently reiterates its calls to stop the attacks against hospitals, for an immediate ceasefire and for the protection of medical facilities, staff and patients. In a tweet, they also said their staff had witnessed people who were attempting to flee the hospital being shot at. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has again rejected calls for a ceasefire. In a televised address, he said Israel would continue to fight to crush Hamas with full force, a ceasefire only possible if all 239 hostages were released. Australia has not formally called for a ceasefire, although Foreign Minister Penny Wong said this morning steps towards it cannot be one-sided. The death toll in Gaza is now reportedly over 11,000 people. CCTV footage has emerged at the moment. A huge fire ripped through a burger shop in Melbourne, which some believe may have been a hate crime. It comes as an apology is issued to the Jewish community following violent clashes in Melbourne that's now seen police step up their patrols. National Affairs editor Austin Pollock has the very latest.
Police presence is set to increase on the streets of Melbourne following violent clashes between supporters of Israel and Palestine on Friday night. The protest took place following a suspicious blaze at nearby burger shop Burgertory in the suburb of Caulfield, which has a high Jewish population. The owner of that shop, as well as a number of groups, including the Islamic Council of Victoria, have said that it may have been a hate crime sparked by his involvement in a pro-Palestine rally. CCTV has also emerged at the time of the attack. 2 men in hoodies are seen breaking into the burger shop, then just moments later step back outside before a huge explosion occurs. The men then run from the building. Police have so far said it is not known to be a politically motivated attack. Now, this ugly clash between supporters took place near a synagogue. However, the organisers of this demonstration say they did not know that there was a synagogue nearby. Free Palestine Melbourne releasing a statement saying the location of the demonstration was a neutral public area, Princes Park. Organisers were unaware that there was a synagogue across the park. We apologise to the local Jewish community for the protests that led to the evacuation of the synagogue. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has today responded to this event on ABC's Insiders, saying that organisers understand this wasn't the right thing to do, but she did not comment on the fire.
Look, I think a protest near a synagogue was not the right thing to do, and I think the organisers know that, which is why they have apologised. I want to say this: all Australians, including our Jewish community, have a right to be safe and to feel safe. No one in this country should be fearful because of who they are or their faith. What I would say more broadly, David, is this. We all understand how distressing these events are. There are people who have lost family, people who have lost friends, people who deeply about these issues. These are traumatic images, the loss of life. We must all work to ensure that distress does not turn into hate and anger.
Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen said anti-Semitism in every form and the attacks on the Islamic community were unacceptable, as she promised more police patrols.
Cannot allow violence in the Middle East to beget violence here on the streets of Melbourne. We must come together and support one another. We must come together and support people who've lost loved ones, people who are grieving.
Protests also took place again in Melbourne today, pro-Palestine rallies with Victorian Greens leader Samantha Ratnam among those speaking.
And while we are hurting, while our communities are hurting, there is no place for anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in our community. There is no place for hatred in a movement for peace. We must always act with kindness and not turn on each other. It's in moments like these that we can feel helpless, but we do what we can. You are all here today, doing what you can do today, showing support for people trapped in Gaza, demanding an immediate ceasefire, an end to the occupation, and calling for a lasting peace.
Demonstrations have also been in Sydney, where Palestinian supporters blocked Port Botany, stopping an Israeli ZIM shipping vessel from arriving. Chris Minns has called it a ridiculous event.
Let's get to some of the other stories making news right now. And the Optus boss is set to be grilled over Wednesday's nationwide network outage. Kelly Bayer Rosemarin has said she will cooperate with the federal inquiries. The company is facing the threat of substantial fines over customers' inability to call 000. Landlines were unable to dial the emergency number, and hospitals were also affected. The cause has been attributed to a network event that triggered cascading failure. ACT Greens MP Jonathan Davis has been urged to consider his political future after serious allegations were raised against him. Davis has been stood down from his duties as an MLA by the Greens after allegations he had sexual relations with an underage boy and a teenager. He was referred to police by the Greens, and it's now been reported a second investigation has been launched by the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly. Chief Minister Andrew Barr has urged Davis, who was elected in 2020, to consider his political future. He remains a Member of Parliament and a member of the Greens, and if he was expelled from the party, could remain in office until the October 2024 general election. The Greens are in a coalition government with Labor and the ACT and have a total of 3 ministers out of 6 MPs, Davis not being a minister. New polling shows both major parties have taken a hit in New South Wales. The polling conducted by Resolve for the Sydney Morning Herald showed Labor's primary vote on 36%, down from 37% at the state election in March, while the coalition has taken a bigger hit, dropping from 35.4 to 32. The Greens are up 4 to 13, while independents have gone from 8.7 to 12. Both are needed in the lower house as the government does not have a majority. Premier Chris Minns has dropped his preferred premier from 35% to 35% from a previous high of 41% in September. That was, however, higher than when he was elected. Multiple people are dead after a fiery crash in Victoria's high country. Emergency services were called to the scene at the small town of Pyries near Mansfield at around 7 a.m. this morning, with the burnt-out remains of a car discovered in a field along Mansfield Woods Point Road. Victoria Police say all occupants inside the vehicle died at the scene. It's being reported the driver lost control of the car and crashed into a tree before it caught fire. The death of 2 toddlers found in a car in remote Queensland has been described by police as a tragic accident. Emergency services were called to a property west of Rockhampton when they found an unresponsive 2-year-old. The child was taken to hospital where they were pronounced dead. Just over an hour later, authorities returned to the scene where they found a 3-year-old in the same car, also taken to hospital and pronounced dead. Police say that residents found the unresponsive 2-year-old on the rear seat, but the 3-year-old wasn't initially found. Detective Inspector Darren Shadlow says it appears to have been a tragic accident. He confirmed the children were related, but were not brothers. Talks of masks returning have been sparked after a rise in COVID-19 cases across the country. More than 6,500 new cases were reported across the nation in the last week of October in what's been described as the 8th wave of the virus to hit Australia. The West Australian reports WA Health has no plans to recommend people in that state start wearing masks again. The wave is likely to differ between states and territories. There are fears a cybersecurity incident that shut down a major port could lead to freight delays. Australian Federal Police are now investigating the incident at DP World, which manages container terminals in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Fremantle, and has now shut down its land operations. A spokesperson for the company said to safeguard employees, customers and networks, we have restricted landside access to our Australian port operations while we continue our investigation. Shadow Cybersecurity Minister James Patterson says both criminal gangs and state-backed actors do seek to target companies like DP World, and it's important the federal government steps in to assist. Concerns have been raised over possible low turnout as voters in the Victorian seat of Mulgrave prepare to decide who will replace former Premier Dan Andrews. Voting for the by-election has already begun and will conclude this Saturday. Senior reporter Darby Travers has the latest from Melbourne.
We're now less than a week out until the Mulgrave by-election in Victoria, where Labor are looking to hold on to Dan Andrews' old seat. Andrews resigned as Premier and from Parliament back on September 26 after over 20 years as the member for Mulgrave. Labor has chosen Greater Dandenong Mayor Eden Foster as their candidate. Others contesting include the Liberals, Victorian Socialists, Greens and high-profile independent Ian Cook. Cook did receive 18% of the primary vote in 2022, while the Liberals had just over 17%. Andrews was still able to win the seat on first preferences alone, with 51% getting up to 60% on a two-candidate preferred basis. It does appear very likely that Labor will retain the seat, but Six News has heard concerns from those on the ground in Mulgrave about a potentially low turnout, some saying that locals might not even know that the by-election is on or that they do have to vote. At the last Victorian by-election in Warrandyte back in August, there was a turnout of 79%, down 11% from the state election. At the time, the Victorian Electoral Commission said that it was comparable to other by-elections such as Northcote in 2017 with a 79% turnout.
They want a short campaign. They've got a new premier. I think they're worried about what this could mean if it went badly for a new premier. So there's a lot of incentive for them to have a short and quick campaign. And they're banking on people just voting as usual. So, all we can do is get our message out there. Thank you so much for this opportunity. We'll be getting our voice out there as often and as far as we can. We want people to know that there is options, there are choices, and we want people to really consider that, letting more of Labor is just more of neglect. So we really want to get out there, get our message out there, and give people a real choice.
Early voting began earlier this week and will continue tomorrow, with polls closing at 6 p.m. local time on Saturday, November 18.
Joe Biden will meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on Wednesday in the United States. The White House says the meeting will include discussions on managing relations, trade and Taiwan. Chinese officials say Xi will visit the States from Tuesday and will be there until November 17, attending the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit before then meeting with Biden on the sidelines. They last met at the G20 summit in Indonesia last year. Donald Trump would expand his immigration crackdown by bringing in sweeping roundups of people to then be held in large camps to await deportation, according to a new report published by the New York Times. The newspaper described the former US president's plans as an assault on immigration on a scale unseen in modern American history, and said it aimed to deport millions of people every year. Trump remains the clear frontrunner for the Republican Party nomination, even after another debate held among the other GOP candidates. 6 News North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp has the details.
Some of the major candidates that were on the debate stage, of course, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, all of those are kind of the candidates who are garnering the most attention. They were in the center of the debate stage, meaning they are polling the highest amongst the crowd of candidates. Of course, also on the debate stage was Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, and Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, who I think it's fair to say were kind of non-factors in the debate. That's not to say that the three candidates who were at center stage of the debate were significant factors. I mean, Ron DeSantis really didn't say anything of substance, except for he did go after former President Trump for not participating in the debate, which was interesting because it was kind of one of the few moments where we've actually seen Ron DeSantis go after Donald Trump to such a significant degree. Like the vast majority of the other candidates in the field, Ron DeSantis has been very reluctant to say anything too critical of Donald Trump because he knows that that is where the majority of the party is at. They know the majority of the Republican Party is also the majority of Donald Trump's base, and thus has been I guess, reluctant and hesitant to really come out and say anything of substance. Obviously, Donald Trump is facing a large number, I think 91 different felony counts, and thus nothing is for sure, and there is a possibility that he might not be able to remain in the presidential race. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not even predicting that's going to happen, but it is, of course, a possibility, as many other things are possible. That is, of course, one of them, but he's polling very high right now. His indictments and the charges that he is facing have not brought his polling numbers down at all as of yet, and thus we really don't have any reason to believe that he would drop out of the race.
Voters in the United States state of Ohio have approved a measure to legalise recreational cannabis, the 23rd state to do so since 2012. The move overseas has ramped up the push here in Australia from the Legalised Cannabis Party, who have 5 MPs in 3 states across the nation. For more, 6 News spoke with Victorian Legalised Cannabis MP David Edershank.
An overwhelming majority of the population that have supported it. It is obviously just it's a statutory amendment. So what that means, of course, is that the governor or the Congress in Ohio could actually just not do it or amend it. But on the face of it, it looks like a really good set of changes, and it's very consistent with where legalised cannabis is heading in here in Australia, with the bills that have been moved in New South Wales, Victoria, and in Western Australia. As to the actual legislation in Ohio, I think it is good stuff. There's a few things in there that are a bit odd. So one of the things that struck me is that it specifically allows employers to have a zero drug policy and then be indemnified against illegal dismissal if they choose to sack someone because they've got some cannabis or some THC in their blood, which of course is an issue we're trying to address here with an inquiry that's kicking off in the new year on workplace drug testing and cannabis.
Do you think the election of yourself, your colleague Rachel Payne, and also the high vote that your party's had nationally shows Australians are now ready for legalisation?
Absolutely. I mean, there was an essential poll about 4 weeks ago that had a simple majority of people saying that cannabis should be treated the same way as alcohol and drugs, regulated sensibly and taxed. And in that poll, I think it was just over 50% were yes, another 20% were undecided, and only 30% that were against. So sort of allow a bit of a split, and you've got a pretty comfortable margin that most governments would be happy with. But it's that whole thing of is there the political courage and the political willpower to make change, and that's really what we're trying to deal with at the moment.
It's been a year since you were elected, if you can believe that. How have you found working with the state government in terms of pushing for legislation? And of course, if you want to push for that, they will eventually have to come on side. This, of course, being what voters have elected you to do.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting. There's sort of the public stage, and then there's what happens sort of behind the scenes. And look, behind the scenes, it's really interesting that there's a lot of people from both the major parties that are keen to see reform. So there's a number of people in the opposition who have quite publicly called for legalisation, not just of cannabis, but of a range of drugs. And then, of course, as you quite correctly say, you've got One Nation, they're pro-legalisation of cannabis. You've got the Libertarians, Animal Justice Party, as well as ourselves and the Greens. So there's a lot of people who want change, recognising, though, the political reality in Victoria I mean, a lot of people just say, well, just take it to the vote. That's all you got to do. And if they won't, the government won't support it, you just block supply. And of course, there's a couple of problems with that sort of approach. One is that the Victorian Constitution specifically precludes the Legislative Council from blocking supply, so that's a bit of a bummer. And of course, the other one is that the government has an overwhelming majority in the Legislative Assembly. So even if a vote was successful in the Legislative Council, it would and if the government doesn't support it, it will die in the Legislative Assembly, and it will never become law. So it's a process of both legislation and negotiation that needs to be advanced.
There we go, that was David Eddershank, legalised cannabis MP in the Victorian Parliament. Now for a look at the top stories in Perth on WAMN News is Ivan Amelli.
Thanks, Puggle. Tonight on WAMN News, Fremantle's dark underbelly exposed. The cleanup begins following our exclusive report. We have an update on this matter.
Watching movies as a detainee commits self-harm. Internal report details Unit 18's mismanagement.
One step, $1. Aishwarya's parents walk from Morley to Margaret River to raise support for their daughter's foundation.
A new GP opens its doors to fill health services gap in Perth South. And later, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Let's get a recap now of the top stories we're following on 6 News this hour. And 2 premature babies have died and another 37 are at risk after the neonatal intensive care unit at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital stopped working due to a lack of electricity. The facility's director says there is a lack of fuel which provides electricity to the incubators, allowing for warm temperatures and a constant flow of oxygen. More than 11,000 people have died in Gaza since October 7. And CCTV footage has emerged of the moment a huge fire ripped through a burger shop in Melbourne. It comes as an apology is issued to the Jewish community following violent clashes in Melbourne that's now seeing police step up patrols. That is 6 News for this hour. You can stay up to date by heading to our website, SIXNewsAU.com, and following us on social media at 6NewsAU. News is on the hour every hour here on 6 News. For now though, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.